Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Thank you.
So we'll go through a bit of a. I have a few questions for Gillian, and then if we have a bit of time at the end, we're going to finish up with a Q&A.
Perfect.
So Gillian, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how Get Gifted came to be?
I started, prior to Get Gifted, I used to own a restaurant in Ontario. I had it for 5 years, so I was a local business owner. And, operationally, I ran, the staff, the payroll. And it got to a point where after I sold the restaurant in 2009, I came back to the East Coast and went to school. And during my time in school, I ended up working with a lot of local business owners. And actually kind of fell in love with a multitude of businesses, not just one business. So I couldn't really decide at the time what specific business I wanted to get involved in, but I did definitely see an opportunity that they needed a lot of help with their social media presence. So that's really what geared me towards starting a company called Get Gifted. It started off as an experiment. And it was a way for businesses to use gifts to get customers through their door within a two-week period. So there was a quick call to action and get customers to promote them positively within their social networks.
Did you have sort of a light bulb moment that was the trigger to start the business, or was it something that came about gradually over your observations?
No, I would say that there was a light bulb moment of sorts, like when I was meeting with, there was customer discovery happening when I didn't even consider it customer discovery. I was meeting with businesses, I was going through their doors, I was asking them questions, and it just seemed that the common denominator was, we don't know how to use Twitter, and we don't use Facebook, and we don't know what to say, or who our audience is. So it really started as asking them for $10 gift cards. And I said, you know what, let's just get customers to talk positively about you over social media, and we'll mail out these gift cards, and then you can see if they come in. So it was really 1 month of doing that, where we started to get a lot of engagement within our local community. So I founded the company in Charlottetown, so that's where Get Gifted originated. And quickly within that month, I was mailing out gift cards with stamps and envelopes and direct messaging them their addresses. So it really kind of evolved into, there needs to be an app for this to make life easier, and let's give it a go and see if we could get a whole community of people talking about these businesses.
So how did you get the word out about the business in the early days?
We Twitter primarily. There wasn't any money in the bank. This was really an experiment. I reached out to a friend of mine. I said, what about, can you build this application where we can track redemptions? And that's kind of how it started. And within 6 weeks, he turned it around. So we had this working thing, and it was like, how do we tell people about it? So we just started with a Twitter account. We weren't branded. We didn't have a business model. We didn't know if it was going to work. We were hoping it would, but very quickly, within 3 weeks, just to give you some context around how we were able to kind of measure the early success, was that we delivered an email campaign on Tuesdays, which would feature a network of merchants who have all committed to a gift inventory. So consumers would have to claim the gift on a first come, first served basis. So on our first Tuesday, we had maybe 100 people sign up because we put a URL on a tweet. So we'd follow people, they'd follow us back, keep up that engagement, thank them, and that's really how it all stemmed and started. And then we were able to see quickly that people were signing up and getting more involved.
And can you talk a little bit about how the business was different from day one through to your expansion into Toronto?
Yeah. Day one, there was no established milestones or goals or forecasts as to what we were to expect, because it was just so new to myself at the time. It was about assessing consumer purchasing behavior, what's going to incent them to get through the doors of a business. So it was, for the first 6 months, it was really about kind of tracking the engagement and the activity level. So, each Tuesday kind of marked kind of elevated the threshold each week. How how many opens are we going to get within the first hour of delivering this gift list, and how many claims of gifts are we going to get. So by the time we were almost a year into launching the business, so it was the fall of 2013, after getting accepted into the Propel ICT program, Launch 36. You know, we were working towards expanding into other markets, New Brunswick being the first stop. We tried a stint in Fredericton and St. John, and quickly the decision was around, you know, we've got really no money, we're revenue based, and this is how we started to grow the company. In the early days was just whatever we could get from our customers, merchant-wise, $100 a month on average. And you know, we had very limited resources, so we had to make a decision, you know, do we spread our resources throughout the New Brunswick market into these two different cities, or do we try and concentrate our resources into one market with a larger audience, which was Halifax? So within the year, we launched our Halifax market, spent 8 months here as we were preparing to get into our Toronto market. So the evolution of the company, myself, you know, we got to a point where we raised some capital from local angel investors and investors actually outside of Atlantic Canada. Evolution just never stopped from the very beginning right up until to the Toronto point. But Toronto was a different market, and we learned a lot from that experience.
Can you talk about what you learned about growing a business as you expanded into other cities? Everything from differences between cities to managing people to making the most of your resources?
Yep. So the difference of cities is an interesting one because we got to experience that like 5 times. So, you know, when we started in Prince Edward Island, it was really looking at the market and why is this working in this smaller area. There's, you know, the city was made up of 40,000 people. You know, when we went into the New Brunswick markets, it was a little bit slower of a take. Understandably, it was probably because there was a lot of personal relationships that we had in the founding city that we were in. It gained a lot of momentum and a lot of subscribers signed up. You know, exponentially, I'd say that within PEI, we ended up getting over 13,000 users within a short period of time organically. And then, you know, Halifax is a bigger market. You know, it's kind of one of those, you look and you say, there's all this opportunity. There's not just 100 great merchants, there's 400 great merchants, and you wanted to capture that. It was very new. Halifax was our first market that we entered that was familiar with Groupon. So there is that local daily deal buying advertisement platform. So, you know, we had to face those objections, and we had to position ourselves and what differentiated our stuffs with the businesses here, because obviously we were doing something different, but it was still novel to them. And, you know, Halifax, first year in Halifax grew at the same rate the first year PEI did, which was interesting, and it was good to see after 2 years of, you know, collecting the data and looking at it. But then Toronto was, I would say, that was our last expansion, and it was very short-lived. It lasted 3 gift lists, and that was in December of this past year. And it was a real eye-opener when we looked into that market, just the concentration of online advertising, startups, businesses. You know, we went in with that approach where what category, we had 12 categories that we worked with. So if it was beauty and health, fitness, restaurant was really our, it was our strongest category because 40% of our businesses were based around food and beverage. So we went into the Toronto launch going after restaurants, and it just became clear after 2 weeks that me and every other app was going to restaurants first. They weren't going to, you know, retailers and beauty and salons. So there was a lot of gatekeepers, and so we quickly had to adjust and say, okay, you know what, if we're not kind of penetrating this restaurant market, we're only here for a very fixed period of time, let's try all the other retailers and see if we can get to a decision maker faster. Because the sales cycle is key when you want to grow. You need people to sign on and commit so you can move on to the next customer. So we did that. We got our test, and then it also became clear that this is a huge market. So what we created in Halifax is it's no big deal to go for a walk and get your free gelato or your frozen yogurt or your $20 to a retail clothing store. But in Toronto, on the customer, on the user side, you're not going to take 3 TTC cars to go get, a free latte in a neighborhood that's not yours. So that was kind of an eye-opener once we landed and we started to really look at the users and the customers and what makes these people tick? How does their purchasing decision, what drives them, what incents them to go to a business? And it is a different mentality and it's fast-paced. So kind of retreating from the Toronto market, it was really about, well, maybe it's those cities where it's that 500,000 user base. Maybe it's those B-level cities to consider. And so that's kind of where we ended our Toronto launch before making further decisions.
And just before we part from that topic, I mean, one of the traits of entrepreneurs is that we're often very stubborn, and that sometimes we only learn lessons after going through them ourselves, even if people told us like 2 years ago to watch out for certain things. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about any lessons that you learned going through this that you really only learned having gone through it yourself?
We don't have all night. Lessons. I would say that, keeping things simple and knowing what the core piece of your business is the one thing you want to hold on to, but be flexible, depending on where you are in your company. To have a great network of mentors or advisors, people that you can reach out to that maybe have gone through similar experiences. It is a lesson because it's something that can really help you when you go through the tough times or the good times. So having those people there. And I would say there is a lot of pressure around grow big, grow fast as you can, as quick as you can. But there is something to be said around the team that you surround yourself with. And, there is that saying where it's hire slow, fire fast. And there is some truth to it where if you're not an expert in a particular, say, department or whatever it is in your company, find somebody who can kind of go to bat for you and help you make those hiring decisions. So, if you've got gaps and weaknesses, it's okay. It's just, get some expertise around how somebody can help fill those gaps and weaknesses.
So in late March, you announced that you'd be winding down Get Gifted. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that decision and why you chose to be public about it?
Yep. So March, don't want to. It's one of those things. March was really a defining month for us because after we had our launch in Toronto and then Christmas time rolled around, it was more important for me to, I had technical infrastructure problems where I knew that no matter what, I'd have to rebuild what I've already built. But that's a costly endeavor to pursue. So what I chose to do is call all my customers, continue the customer discovery. I had merchants that were coming up on renewals and I said, perfect case scenario, if my technical issue is fixed, does that fix all my problems inside my business? Especially with you're raising money and you have other people's money at stake, you're responsible for making the best decisions. And I called all the customers and I really had a conversation with them in a different light than when you're doing a sales call, because when you're doing a sales call, you're asking all the questions because you're gearing them to say, yes, I'm in. And this was really understanding where Get Gifted was, but where marketing and advertising was on their priority list and how important it was for them. I internally believe that I was a painkiller solving this problem. And in light, I would say that some of the feedback that I got, I don't really think that they thought they had the problem I thought they had, right? So, you kind of have to separate yourself and just look at it objectively. And, that was a key decision maker for us where we said, if we were going to invest all this time and money into, a relaunch of the technology, is that going to increase? Is that going to speed up my sales cycle? Is that going to get merchants to sign on faster? Is that going to enable us to, scale? We weren't at that stage where we could have. I wasn't seeing the path to the future success, and a lot of that, I paid a lot of attention to detail around my financial statements and how I was spending money and where the money was going and what my runway was. And going through this process, I just kept bringing the company to a leaner and leaner and leaner state until I could make that decision. You never anticipate that you're going to, you don't want to think about, oh, I'm going to close my business. Like, your heart and soul goes into it for so long. And, but the reality is, we're at a stage, is this going to get us to where we need to be over the next runway? If it's 6 to 8 months, am I going to make up for any milestones that we'd missed along the way? Or do you say, you know what, do you call it a day and say we still had capital left in the bank, and it was the decision that I made to return the remaining capital to the investors. I didn't feel I was going to make those milestones over the next 6 months and rebuild an entire team and rebuild the company from scratch all over again in the position that I was in. And
very admirably, and I've heard only glowing things about your decision to be public about this. I think you garnered a lot of respect for that. Why did you choose to do that instead of just winding it down quietly?
The users. There was momentum on Tuesdays, no doubt, right? So we had a lot of users that anticipated this gift list, and this helped them decide where they were going to eat that week or where they were going to go work out that month. So there was an expectation when users are tweeting us, where's the gift list? So the first thing we have to do is we have to let them know that there no longer will be a gift list. But it's also timing and how you wind things down. So for us, it was, on the public side, our merchants and our users, doing it quick, I think, and doing it efficiently. And once the decision was made internally myself, it was just a matter of getting it done and not dragging it on. Because when you know something, when you're going to close something, you want to deal with it. So that's why we had to be public about it. And people had questions, and a lot of people want to do, if it was an interview or, optically Get Gifted was a local success, why is it shutting down? But you just kind of have to pick and choose who you're going to tell that story to. And I thought I did pretty good on the picks of who I was going to share the story with. So, that's why we had to go public with it, but it worked out.
And what advice would you offer other founders who might find themselves in the same position? Because, sometimes like hitting that hockey stick like really is right around the corner, and sometimes it isn't, and you'll never know. Mm-hmm. So what signals should you be watching for on the horizon if you feel like that decision is looming?
You would have enough of a track record to know how close to the milestones that you had forecasted, if you're going to hit them or not. So if there's ups and downs, it's like you don't want to give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens. But there are knowing your core business, knowing its strengths, knowing what experiments or assumptions that you've made that you've been able to actually check off and said that this worked, and strengthening those things, stick with it. If the money's there and the feelings are good and the progress is on its way, the best thing to do and my suggestion, but if you were to be challenged with the decision, is this business working for me or isn't it? Take a select group of people, if it's an advisor, if it's a mentor, but you got to talk to somebody about it. It's a decision that's kind of anguishing when it's all in your head, but to reach out and talk to somebody about, here are the pros and cons. Do I pivot? Do I sell? Do I close? There's all these options available for you, but it's finding the right one that works for you. And hockey stick growth, that's the mecca.
The dream, yeah.
The mecca. Yeah.
And how did you know who to turn to as a sounding board when you were making the decision? And were those people different from the people that were there at the very beginning?
That's a good question. The people, I was very selective with who I shared my concerns with, because I think you don't want to have everybody worried and concerned. You want to kind of keep it contained. And the people that I did talk to were people that were with me from the beginning, early advisors and mentors, friends in the industry. You know, it's hard to pick up the phone and call and say, this is where I'm at, but you start to learn very quickly that when you find the right people, they're there to support you. So yeah, it was a small group. It was a select group. I had some advisors, but I also had I had 12 angel investors. I had 3 that, ironically enough, and I never knew the story, that one of them had gone through the exact same thing. So when you hear that, you're just like, okay, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that's going through this right now. And then, as it turns out, we put a small team together in St. John's, and, just kind of had this candid, open floor conversation about where I'm at and what my thoughts are on closing the business. And it turns out that, it happens. It happens. You make the decision. It's just making the best decision in the hardest situation. But
we have a podcast with Go Full Steam, and we talk to small business owners about their journeys. And one of the questions that I always like to ask is, like, everyone has advice, and who do you know who to listen to? And the answer that comes up again and again and again is, you start to know in your world who your most trusted advisors are, but at the end of the day, you just have to trust your gut. Yeah. What were some of the just sort of gut checks that you did with yourself without anyone else around, and the questions you asked yourself?
That's a really good point, because at the end of the day, you have to own the decision. It's got to come from somewhere, and you got to feel good about it, and it's all about you. Are you going to be able to sleep at night with the decision that you're making? You don't want to go through a tough decision because somebody else maybe told you to do it, and then you start to regret it, right? That wasn't this case, but I got onto a rant. You got to repeat the question.
Oh, what were the gut checks that you did with yourself?
Excel sheets don't lie. Financials are a huge indicator on how far you can take the company. I didn't want to hit a wall after another 8 months of continuously trying and trying. I tested a lot of my assumptions and the hypothesis that I set out originally, and they didn't work. So I made my decision. It took about 3 weeks to make it, and it was asking those questions. The first part is just getting over the hard part of, is this really an option that I'm gonna allow myself to think about closing down a company? But really, it's something that you got to feel good with, and you got to do it in a way that you're kind of open and honest with the stakeholders and the people that are involved, right? Because those are relationships that you want to carry, and you want to carry these good relationships moving forward, whatever that looks like. So you'll be asking yourself 1,000 questions. Yeah.
Were you surprised by any of the reactions to the news?
Yes and no. I would say that, it was obviously overwhelming and kind from the consumer side of things, that they missed, what the experience that we were providing and stuff like that. So that was nice. You don't know what to expect when you announce something that's, obviously a turning point in your career and a turning point in your company. But I did keep the investors and the very close people to me informed of what was happening. There wasn't a shock or a surprise, and obviously there was a period where they digested where I was at. But on the other hand, because they were kind of with me along the way and they knew where I was, they all really kind of stood up and said, you made the right decision. So,
and Looking back on the experience, can you talk about some of your proudest moments?
Well, yeah, Tuesdays were always a proud moment. If we got through them successfully, nothing broke. Um, Tuesdays, we had weekly high fives when everything was like absolutely perfect. But really, I would say just starting a startup company is a pretty proud moment, like um, meeting a whole different industry of people and the ecosystem, especially that's, you know, in Atlantic Canada. I'm proud of a lot of the things that I did. I can't really pick one specific thing. You kind of put everything that you got out on the line and you take this huge risk, right, to make your company work, and you do everything that you got inside you to make it happen, and you do your best, right? So that's proud.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so now that you've had just a tiny, tiny little bit of time to reflect,
Yeah.
when you look at the startup ecosystem in
Yeah.
Atlantic Canada, what are you most excited about?
Well, I've kind of had the pleasure for the last week to meet a lot of companies in New Brunswick and Halifax and Newfoundland. I was there for the first time. And I think when I started Get Gifted, I was based out of Prince Edward Island, and it was very, I'd say geolocated. Like it was, I wasn't really aware of the ecosystem and the community, but what I'm starting to see now and what I think is really cool is that we're looking at these 4 provinces as a region, and people are working together with the same, I don't know, initiative in mind, and building those relationships, if it's Nova Scotia or Newfoundland or wherever it is. So I think that is really going to probably support and help entrepreneurs, and I'm excited to be a part of that in a different role.
Awesome. So as we wind things down here, we'll move to a Q&A, but maybe before we jump there, what's next for you?
Best question. You get asked all the time. I'm taking June off. I definitely want to be working within the ecosystem here in Atlantic Canada, and there's been a lot of opportunities, and it's just finding the right one that feels right. So that's what's next.
Awesome. So I think we'll open things up to a Q&A, and just for the purposes of the video recording, if anyone asks a question, I'll just repeat it back for the microphone.
Would you do it again?
So the question was, would you do it again?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would. When you believe in something that much, yeah, I would.
You said that when your client renewals came up, that you felt that there was a bit of a gap between their perception of their business and your perception of their business.
Yeah.
Which one was more subjective, or what was realistic?
So the question was, in the conversations that Gillian was having with her customers, she was comparing her view of the business and their view of the business, what was more real?
I'm going to say my view. No, it was being a local business owner. I know, I was good at cooking. I was good at hospitality. I was good at the core things that I had to do with inside my business. I wasn't a marketer when I was running my business. What I saw, the potential for these businesses to get involved in this idea of giving to build business, measured results, return on investment, for them, I thought that was really, really important for them. But there are priorities that have stronger weight, And the other thing too is that Get Gifted wasn't for every business, Some businesses, I'd say, fall in different categories. There's technically sophisticated businesses, there's ones that still do maybe traditional media advertising and some that do none at all. So for us, it was just finding the right fit for us. If I looked at myself as a restaurant owner, of course I'd want to know how many people an advertisement would bring through my door in a matter of 2 weeks. Yeah.
We have an alarm testing, so it's planned just to keep us energized.
It'd be a bad coincidence if it was.
do you feel about the pace versus response? What is that like to cover that?
Yeah.
So the question was, in light of demands to grow your business really quickly, how do you manage the pace of growth?
I think in order to be a great business, you have to learn how to become a good business first. And in our case, we were just moving as fast as we could with the resources that we had. So it was trying to pick markets. Like we were really flying by the seat of our pants. We're just like, let's do New Brunswick first because it's a smaller population. It should be easier. And then we're like, you know what? This is really costly because we don't have a direct salesperson in that market. Whereas Halifax, we can concentrate our efforts. So you just have to be agile as to the decisions, why you're making them, and how they're going to impact you down the road. So, that was really, the best I could do at the time was just make those decisions on where are we going to land. I learned quickly, like when you have a team or a salesperson in place in that city, it was far easier to get sales than when you were doing a cold call or a cold email or an email campaign. There was very little uptake on that, but they wanted to see the person's face through their door, and it's just not scalable.
Let's just relate them. I'm just wondering how you found your salespeople. Like, what are some strategies around finding good salespeople in Halifax?
So the question is how to find good salespeople in Halifax.
Sales, it is not an easy position to find. To fill. It's like if there could be like, you should do a sales boot camp. No, it really isn't. Like I outsourced somebody to work with my sales team that I had just to, get more in depth on the sales process. There's so much to it, right? Like there's personality, I definitely say that it is a gap. And I don't think it's just Halifax. I think it's everywhere. And I know in Atlantic Canada, I know my relationships in PEI. It's one of those things where professional sales. I think people always kind of took it as a job, right? But it could be a very lucrative job if you're working with a great company. So, yeah, I found it difficult. Yeah.
The universities or
Sorry?
Where would you even start?
I hired local. So where would you start? I guess you really kind of have to start with the profile of the person that you want, not by looking for the person, like who would make an ideal candidate for my business, and just look at it that way. So at least and then you're dealing with salespeople, so they'll sell you on themselves, right? But numbers don't lie. So I think just putting some metrics and some milestones. I think probationary periods are always key for sales positions, and having a compensation package. You got to find out what keeps them motivated. A good salesperson, it's the win. You know what I mean? Money's part of it, but it's really that win and that close. So finding out their history and track record is probably ideal.
Jill, did you grow faster than you should have because of the money you raised?
Yeah.
So the question was, did you grow faster than you should have because of the money you raised?
Yeah, I'm skewing towards a yes on that one. I did. I felt like, I think one of the gaps that I wish I would have filled earlier in starting the company was to find a technical co-founder. I didn't start as a technical person. I'm a sales and marketing person. And, I think that experience, that's something that I wish I would have had that co-founder to lead a team and execute, where I felt like I was really responsible for making this technical piece work. And it was just the pressure to get it done. And it took way too long, but we still had to keep moving forward. So I think that, and you raise money, so you're spending it and you're using it and you're building your team. And I made some good calls and I made some bad calls. So, yeah, I think I tried too hard, too fast.
Was there ever an opportunity to sell the business to somebody else who had deeper pockets and wanted to take it forward into a cross-Canada scenario? Were you ever approached?
So the question is, was there ever an opportunity to sell the company?
There wasn't. We decided, are we going to close? Are we going to sell? To get it done, we were closing the business. There wasn't enough, like, for IP, like, I was the intellectual property behind it. I was, it was my learnings, right, that would move it forward. So really, I was kind of, after a lot of discussion, like, I'm the asset, right? So, aside from anybody can copy the infrastructure if they wanted to. And really, we just had a subscriber list at the end of the day. So the technology, had it been in a different state, if it was working properly, if it was totally, if people could self-onboard, if it was in a different state, potentially, yes. But at the state it was in, it just wasn't.
My question is like, as a small business, at the first time, how many people of your team and how you decide to expanding the team?
So the question is, when you start a small business, how many people are on the team and how do you decide to expand the team?
Okay, so as a small business, it's always yourself and somebody you really, really need to help you, right? Be more efficient with your time. So based on how you're going to allocate your time, finding those human resources to grow your business, you have to decide what you need right away. Do you need technical? Do you need a creative person? Do you need a salesperson? Revenues obviously is key to growing a company, but there's a lot of things that have to happen beforehand if you need infrastructure, right? So as you need it, and there's no harm in instead of just hiring an employee with that commitment is, what worked for me was outsourcing projects. I found outsourcing projects help me get better at my expectations as to what I want. It's a deliverable, so it's not based over hours per week, so paid on deliverable. So that kind of helped me get better at meeting my deliverables by doing that. But it's what you need, yeah, and what you can afford.
Big one. Yeah. Oscar?
Just because it's the female founders month currently, what was your, I didn't know really, and we have enough females in this crowd, which I like. What was your experience as a female founder?
So what?
Like any advantages, disadvantages, anything the community could do better, or they did everything they could do for you?
So the question is, what was your experience as a female founder?
I had a positive experience. It's about qualifications of the job. Like female, male. I think, obviously, Osga and I were in one of the same accelerator programs, but it's just kind of like the old days in the culinary world. It was just like females were kind of minority chefs, right? So it's just an evolution as to kind of broadening the spectrum of what you want to do when you grow up, female or male. So I had good people around me. So I don't really have any negative things to say. It's been positive.
Any last questions?
Thank you.
Yeah.
It sounds sort of like tech, market, money were the three kinds of blockers.
Yeah.
Along the way, as you were considering the pivot, was there one of those that could have broke differently? Like, is there one thing that was a block, one of those three, or was it all three?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so the question was, between technology, market, and money, was there one of those things that was a particular barrier, or was it a combination of the three?
combination of the three, because when I was considering a pivot, it required a rebuild of technology and then going after a different segment of the market. So where I was going kind of door-to-door local, I was looking at more of a corporate multi-rooftop market in a pivot situation. And I was looking at, a few more layers of features and functions that my pivot app, would be able to accommodate a different level of measuring in-store visits. So it was a combination. That was a good question.
Yeah, I have one question as well. So you clearly learned a lot from this experience.
Yeah.
But what is the one key thing that you wish you would have known when you started that you know now?
So what's the one thing you wish you'd known at the beginning that you know now?
It's a good question, Isaac. Look at you. I wish I would have had a partner in my business. Somebody that you can collaborate with, that you can disagree with, learn how to agree with, whiteboard, stay late at night with. There's a big difference between employees and a co-founder. That would be it.
Last questions? Yeah.
Talking about raising money in Atlantic Canada, there's sort of different theories and ideas out there about whether a lot of our angels have found out it right now or vice versa. How was your experience? You mentioned you raised money with 12 angels. So how did you go about that?
So how did you raise angel investment, particularly in Atlantic Canada?
It all started as that handshake, that introduction in a social setting. It's not about pitching your business. It wasn't even about asking them for money. It was about, you kind of look up to these tech investors, but you look up to them in the sense that, they've accomplished something, they've done something. So you just want to kind of gain their knowledge. So it really was a relationship building process, and it wasn't a short process. So, the first thing I started to do is they would ask me a lot of questions, and it's really your follow-up and your initiative to follow up and say, I may not know the answers to your questions today, but I will find out and I will let you know. Here's where we are in our company. Do you mind if I keep you involved on the thread? I'll send you a progress update. So it's just kind of keeping them in the loop, even though you're not asking for money. You're kind of courting because you want to decide too, is this the right investor for my business? So as you're looking for capital, you're also looking for somebody that eventually, if it works out, you're going to be using their money, and you want to make sure that that's a pretty solid relationship, or it's on a strong footing where they see that you're credible and you're doing what you say it is that you're doing, and it makes it easier to work with them through the good times and bad. So
on that note, not to hear any names, of course, but horror stories.
Horror stories?
Yeah, a couple of things went wrong in that process as well, right? But
yeah.
what did I learn?
Can you share some of your horrors about angel investing?
Yeah.
Can you share some horror stories with your potential investors?
So, as a founder, an entrepreneur, do your due diligence on the angels that you're having conversations with. I had somebody meet me, give me a check, and then called me 10 minutes later and said, you know what, I don't want to do it anymore. And that was on the day of close. So, if investors, and I think too, it's a small enough community that if an investor does do something like that, everybody kind of hears about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just something that, you don't want to say, as an investor, you don't want to say yes to a company and then pull out. Just don't say yes, right? So I remember that situation specifically. So, and you just have to, you got to make your own call who you're going to work with at the end of the day. But is there any other horror stories I'm forgetting?
I don't know. those investors that you managed to attract, was there one or two or three that
Oh,
were not filling up the gaps for you? I know, like,
yeah.
a bunch of them are supportive,
Yeah.
a bunch of them are non-committal, and
Yeah.
a bunch can be
MIA.
pain in the ass, right?
Yeah,
So
they're.
tell us about the pain in the ass, guys.
Tell us about your pain in the ass
Talk about.
investors.
You just want to talk about the pain.
They could be in the room.
Yeah.
You just want to talk about. Okay, so okay, so I've heard about pain in the ass investors. I didn't have anybody on me micromanaging me. I didn't have a pain in the ass investors. I think that, could there have been more involvement with specifically with a few? Could have been, but you know what? At the end of the day, I'm the CEO running this company, right? So there's investors play by their own rules. If they're going to be involved, if they're not going to be involved, they're believing in you, they're giving you money, but like I didn't have any jerks, if that's what you're asking.
Maybe I'll just ask a question because I know there's a lot of people in the room who have raised money, considering raise money, will be raising money in the future.
Yeah.
Something that I think everybody who's been in that boat has experienced is being kind of strung along by somebody who would like to consider themselves an investor, but maybe never has any intention of doing it.
Yeah.
And if you're in the position of the entrepreneur, it's very easy to get caught up in that, answering questions quickly because you feel responsible to that. Was there anything that you learned around how to qualify potential investors quickly and weed out the ones that were just kind of window shopping?
Okay, couple things. That's a loaded question. Definitely, it's going to take a lot more of your time if you're going to take an angel's money and they haven't made an investment before, but specifically if they haven't made an investment in a startup company. You're not a bricks and mortar, you're not that type of business, right? So it's easier to work with an investor who's familiar with a startup company, first and foremost. I had two investors that weren't, and you know what? Two really great people, but it did take a lot of me having to be that middle person and answer questions on the fly, and questions, because they're not familiar with it, left me having to go seek out a resource to help me answer the questions because you don't know everything, right? So you really learn as you go. But yeah, window shoppers, I've met window shoppers. You just, I don't know. You just got to like kind of see through the shit. You just got to filter through and just be able to, cut them off, really, like move on. Like it's not, if they're not going to add the value and the relationship and put the time in to get to know you and your business, and you're going to learn really quickly, right? So, and there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, are you in or are you out, right? Like we got to get this done. Put a time frame around your round. We're raising money, okay? So when does your round close? Well, once we get $500,000. Well, that's one way of doing it. Or, what about we're raising $500,000 in 3 months, closes May 1st. And that's it. So make your decision by May 1st. Be really upfront about it because any really good investor would respect that. So.
Any last question?
I'm not sure which question to ask. On the investor question, did you have 12 lines of communication or did you consolidate that sometime? Like how did you manage the 12 angels in that group?
So how did you manage communication with your angels?
I did quarterly reports. I included them all in on the thread. Obviously, I had closer relationships with some investors than I did others, but they were all treated the same. And it's basically that simple. If as long as you're available and able to work with them and answer questions. But it was really, that's what they wanted. They're just like, where are you at? What did you do? What do you think you're going to be able to do? And then, the follow-up report. And depending on like their expertise, like, there's always those hey, can we have a Google Hangout because I'm really stumped on this, or, that kind of thing. So just reach out, keep the lines of communication open, but just pick which ones you actually can add value. Not everybody. Can I add
to that as a former venture capitalist?
Yeah.
Good news you share with your investors and your board as a group. Bad news individually.
Yes. Tone told me that, and I forgot to say it. Sorry. No, I did call Tone during this process, and I said, am I going to be sending this news in an email? And he was just like, no, you're going to be calling them personally. You let them, you know what I mean? So there is that element of, keeping a good relationship, and thanks, Tone.
No, but it's also about good news that will cheer you as a group.
Yeah.
Bad news, they feel sorry about you individually.
Yeah.
And try and help you.
Yeah.
If you share that bad news with them as a group, you got one of the buggers to say, you're a bad girl. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 say, oh my God, you're horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the bad and the good news. Bad news individually, good news as a...
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a follow-up on that. Did you blind copy them on those emails? Like, were they a team? Were they a group that you were communicating to, or were they all strangers to each other? Even if some of them knew each other.
No, I personally, I just CC'd everybody. I didn't blind. I didn't put it to everybody. I just, hey, it was that simple. Yeah. And they just want to look at your report, right? Like they just want to know what you've done and where you're going and what it is, so with those reporting procedures or whatever systems you put in place, like usually when you agree on terms, you're going to say, what information you're going to provide. Is it monthly? Is it every 2 months, quarterly, whatever? So it's just keeping consistent with that. And you always say, any questions or feedbacks or insights, like you're open to it.
So I think we're winding down now. There's still lots of time for mixing and mingling. Gillian, I think I speak for everyone. I say this has been just a breath of fresh air. There's a lot of excellent advice and just real talk. So it's been an absolute privilege.
Thanks.
So thank you very much.
Thanks.